Sometimes the most meaningful moments are not announced with fanfare. They do not arrive with flashing headlines or dramatic sound bites. They slip quietly into the news cycle, almost unnoticed, waiting for those willing to look beyond the noise. That is exactly what happened this week when King Charles made a move that on the surface appeared simple, even routine, but beneath it carried a weight that is impossible to ignore. At a time when public conversation around the royal family feels perpetually tense, when narratives of division and conflict are constantly recycled, the king chose not to engage with controversy. He did not address rifts, grievances, or speculation. Instead, he spoke about service. He spoke about young people. He spoke about purpose. And in doing so, he unintentionally highlighted something the media often avoids acknowledging: how closely his values still align with those of Prince Harry. The timing alone made the moment striking. Prince Harry had just returned to the United Kingdom, not for ceremony or celebration, but for something far more challenging. There were no carriages rolling through the streets, no balcony appearances, no carefully choreographed royal optics. Instead, Harry walked into a courtroom, a place defined not by comfort or privilege, but by scrutiny, resistance, and accountability. This was not a symbolic visit. Harry was there to submit a witness statement in his ongoing legal battle against a powerful media publisher, a case that has grown to represent far more than tabloid misconduct. For Harry, this fight is about systemic change. It is about confronting practices he believes caused lasting harm, not just to him, but to countless others who never had the resources, protection, or platform to fight back. That distinction matters, because Harry was not standing in that courtroom to rehash the past for attention. He was there because he believes accountability is essential. Because for him, silence is no longer an option. And that refusal to stay silent has become one of the defining characteristics of his life, especially alongside Meghan. Together, Harry and Meghan have consistently chosen transparency over tradition, truth over comfort, and integrity over image. These choices have come at a steep personal cost. They have faced relentless criticism, distortion, and hostility. But they have remained consistent. And consistency, especially under pressure, is revealing. When Harry returned to the United States shortly after his court appearance, another issue emerged, this time on the global stage. Comments were made that appeared to question the value of NATO alliances, including the United Kingdom. To many, it sounded like familiar political rhetoric, something to be debated and then quickly replaced by the next headline. But for Harry, it was not abstract. It was deeply personal. Nearly 500 British service members lost their lives during the Afghanistan mission. Thousands more returned home with physical injuries, psychological trauma, and life-altering consequences that would follow them long after the public moved on. Harry was not a distant observer of that reality. He served on the ground. He wore the uniform. He lived alongside those soldiers. He understood the weight behind the statistics, so when he responded, he did not do so with outrage or performance. There were no dramatic speeches or viral sound bites designed for attention. Instead, Harry spoke with clarity, respect, and lived experience. He reminded the world that these sacrifices were real, that they were permanent, and that they deserved acknowledgement rather than dismissal. It was a moment that cut through the noise. And while King Charles, as a reigning monarch, cannot publicly engage in political debate, his role as Commander-in-Chief of the British Armed Forces makes it impossible for such a moment to go unnoticed. Within royal circles and military communities alike, it was understood for what it was, not political grandstanding, but an act of respect. This context matters because it frames what happened next. Just days later, King Charles released a recorded message marking the 50th anniversary of the King's Trust, formerly known as the Prince's Trust. The video was calm, reflective, and deeply personal. There were no attacks, no rebuttals, no coded language aimed at family tensions. Instead, Charles spoke about beginnings. He spoke about 1976, about a young man leaving the Navy and using his severance pay to start something small. An organisation designed to support young people who were struggling, overlooked, or simply needed someone to believe in them. At the time, there was no guarantee of success, no blueprint for scale, just an idea rooted in empathy and responsibility. In his message, the king openly admitted that he could never have imagined what that decision would become. What started as a modest effort has now supported more than 1.3 million young people across decades. That number alone is staggering. But numbers only tell part of the story. Behind those figures are lives redirected, confidence restored, education continued, jobs created, futures reshaped. In the UK alone, more than 92,000 young people have been supported in starting their own businesses through the Trust. That is not symbolic charity. That is tangible, measurable change. And this is where the story becomes particularly compelling. Because when you strip away titles, headlines, and constant speculation, what King Charles described is strikingly similar to the work Prince Harry and Meghan are doing today. The platforms may differ. The methods may not align perfectly. But the underlying philosophy, the belief in empowerment, dignity, and long-term impact, is remarkably consistent. Harry's work with the Invictus Games has fundamentally changed how wounded veterans are perceived. Not as broken or defined by injury, but as resilient, capable, and strong. The Games do not glorify suffering, they honour perseverance. They create space for healing, pride, and community. That is service in its purest form. Meghan's advocacy has consistently focused on mental health, equity, and representation. She has spoken openly about the importance of voice, particularly for those who are often dismissed or ignored. Whether through community initiatives, media projects, or philanthropy, her work centres on visibility and dignity. There is a quiet irony in how rarely this alignment is acknowledged. The same media outlets that thrive on framing the royal family as irreparably fractured often fail to mention how closely aligned their values actually are. Service, compassion, sustainability, impact that extends beyond optics. The difference lies not in intent, but in structure. King Charles operates within an institution defined by continuity, restraint, and tradition. Prince Harry and Meghan operate outside of it, where transparency and direct engagement are possible, but also more vulnerable to attack. Different paths, similar purpose. And that reality complicates the simplified narratives we are often fed. King Charles spoke in his message about how the challenges facing young people will continue to evolve, but how their resilience remains constant. Harry has lived that truth both in uniform and beyond it. Meghan has embodied it by refusing to shrink, by choosing empathy even when it was not extended to her. Together they have shown that stepping away from an institution does not mean stepping away from service. In fact, there is something refreshingly honest about how unglamorous real impact often is. It does not trend for long. It does not always photograph well. It rarely comes with applause. It looks like consistency. It looks like commitment. It looks like showing up again and again. It looks like funding youth programs. It looks like defending fallen soldiers. It looks like quietly building community support far from palace gates and press briefings. This moment does not erase past tensions. It does not pretend that everything is healed or resolved. But it does remind us of something essential. Families, like nations, are complex. Alignment can exist even when relationships are strained. Respect can survive distance. And meaningful change often happens quietly, away from the spotlight. In a world addicted to outrage, this was a moment of continuity. A king reflecting on decades of service. A son standing firm in his principles. A couple building a life centered on purpose rather than permission. That is not a story of division. It is a story of evolution.